Welcome to the first annual Joy and Fury Teach-In, the first of hopefully many, many, many more. I figured if I named it the first annual, then it would become a thing, so we're running with it. I'm delighted to see you here tonight. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We are packed in here, which feels amazing to me, but if it doesn't feel amazing to you, we have an overflow room. It is 1170. Estella, raise your hand. Estella knows exactly where it is. I've been told the library is sometimes not the easiest place to navigate. So Estella can show you where it is if that would feel better for you. It is streaming in there. So that's an option for anyone. If the energy here is what you need, then figure out where to sit or stand or be and be in community with everyone else who's here. With that, I am a couple more, nope, I'm just gonna turn it over to Sasha Darlington. Thank you, everyone.
Hi. Before we begin, I would like to start with the Indigenous land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with the Native Nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. At this time, we would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our sponsors, whose support has been instrumental in making this event possible. A special thank you to the School for Cultural and Social Transformation, the College of Social Work, the Women's Resource Center, the Edna Anderson Taylor Communication Institute, the S.J. Kinney College of Law, the University Honor College, the College of Education, University of Utah Health Transgender Health Program, UAF Legacy Health, the LGBT Resource Center, Under the Umbrella Bookstore, Mars Jacobson Photography, and the SLC COVID Education Night for their generous contributions. Additionally, we express our appreciation to the Marriott Library for their invaluable resources and technical assistance. We also thank the catering staff for the Utah Food Services and all their efforts. A thank you to the Transform staff, Estella Hernandez, Stephanie Dawson-Pack, Pat Ross, Evelyn Wells, and a huge personal thank you to Kim Hackford-Pierre for all their hard work in making this event happen. And finally, thank you to our interpreters for tonight's event. Colleagues, esteemed guests, and friends of Dorothy, I would like to welcome you to our very first installment of the Joy and Fury Teach-In entitled Silence Equals Death, Art, Activism, and the Queer Joy of Resistance. Before I introduce tonight's distinguished speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Clement, I would like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Sasha Darlington. I am an alumna of the University of Utah, holding dual bachelor degrees in history and gender studies, and I'm excited to announce that I have recently been accepted into the Masters in American History program here at the U. And I will continue to work alongside Professor Clement during my graduate studies. Dr. Clement's mentorship has been instrumental in shaping my academic pursuits, and I'm immensely grateful for this opportunity to be here introducing her today. Elizabeth Clement holds the distinguished position of an Eileen Clyde Professor of History at the University of Utah. This role reflects her expertise and is also her dedication to social justice and equality, which has made a lasting impact on her students. Professor Clement has been deeply involved in documenting and preserving the personal narratives of individuals who played important roles in the care and support of people living with AIDS in Utah. Notably, her work highlights the remarkable story of Dr. Kirsten Reese and Maggie Snyder, who provided crucial care to patients who were outcast by their communities. Dr. Reese and Snyder are regarded as angels of mercy by the LGBTQ+ community, being the first and only doctors to take care of HIV/AIDS patients during the 1980s. Their incredible efforts are immortalized in the Emmy Award-winning documentary Quiet Heroes, which you can stream on Amazon or Vimeo. Additionally, you can explore the Reese and Snyder HIV/AIDS archive, including the oral histories, scrapbooks, letters, obituaries, and personal materials housed here at the Marriott Library. Also, they're here tonight. Let's give it up for Maggie. Professor Clement is also conducting oral history projects with incoming grad student Mel Palmer, exploring the personal histories of drag performers in Salt Lake City, showcasing drag as a method of queer community through fundraising and mutual aid. In addition, Beth is working with undergraduate Paulina Red to examine the intersection of food, identity, and HIV/AIDS, shedding light onto how communities respond to challenges in an epidemic and laying groundwork for vital organizations like the Utah AIDS Foundation, now known as UAF Legacy Health. For those inspired to get involved, more information regarding UAF Legacy Health, the University of Utah's free HIV PrEP clinic, the University of Utah Health Transgender Health Program is available. Hey, there we go. The success of these organizations is due to the generous contributions from donors, dedicated volunteers, and incredible community members like we have in this room today. We encourage you to reach out to these organizations directly, or you can reach out to any one of us in these t-shirts. As we eagerly look forward to the release of her book, The Reckoning, AIDS in Conservative America, let us recognize Beth for her commitment to amplifying marginalized voices, safeguarding historical narratives, and advocating for a more inclusive and compassionate society. Now, join me in extending a warm welcome to our speaker for tonight's event, Professor Elizabeth Clement.
All right, how's that? Can people in the back hear me? All righty, I'm a wanderer. Also, so just so you know, I'm gonna give you some context for HIV/AIDS and ACT UP, and then we're gonna analyze images together. That means I need your help, right? This is a discussion, it is not just a lecture. Students Mel Palmer and Oliver Taylor will be circulating with mics because this is being streamed. And so if you want to, if you want to say something, raise your hand. They'll come trotting over with a mic. That means that people who are watching this streaming will be able to hear you. Already someone?
Yeah, is this going to be recorded?
Yes, it is recorded. It is streaming. I don't know where we're hosting it. Kim, do we know where we're hosting it?
It will be on the Transform website. It won't be right away because we're also transcribing it, so we need a minute to do that.
Cool.
But yeah, and we can send out a blast to everybody.
We'll blast.
Yeah.
However you figured out how to come here, we'll blast it.
Wherever you heard of us. All righty, let me see. Okay, so let's see. I also have my clicker. We're going to that, and then we're going to this, and then where do I want to be? Help! Yeah, I guess we'll stay there. So before I begin, I must express my deep gratitude for the help provided by our students, Sasha Darlington, Annie Jensen, Annie Oliver, and Mel Palmer, who are also helping tonight. Woo! Soon to all be history graduate students. Haha, College of Transform. Poach them from you. Okay, I also need to say how much I have always loved working with Kim Hackford-Peer, faculty in gender studies. She is a phenomenal colleague whose dedication to her students and the art of teaching is unsurpassed. She also did all of the work to get all of us here together, right? I'm just the little dog and pony show. Kim did everything else with the help of our students. We hatched this idea for a teach-in together in the dark days of early February 2024, when politicians were attacking the ideas that we have fought for so long, the idea that equity matters, the idea that we should include all people who want to come to us for education and community, and the idea that all of those people are diverse and that we want all of them here in the room, and that we are a big tent and we appreciate each other both in our similarities and in our differences. February was also dark because politicians were attacking our trans students, colleagues, and family members. And so this February brought me back to what it felt like to be in college in New York City in the depths of the AIDS crisis. I was living in New York and going to college from 1986 to 1990. Those memories inspired Kim and I to hold an event where we could remind our community of that history. a time when, in the midst of a plague that was cutting our people down, ACT UP created hope through anger and love. This teach-in is our love letter to ACT UP, to the queer and AIDS community, and to the never-ending queer joy of love and resistance. Alrighty, let us get rolling. So, as many of you know, or maybe you don't know, I don't know, you haven't taken my history of sexuality class. Actually, a lot of you have. All right, never mind. For those of you who have not, I need you, there was queer organizing in the 1950s and 1960s, but the Stonewall riots of 1969 in Greenwich Village really began the gay liberation movement as we know it in the United States. In the wake of Stonewall, queer people argued that everyone should come out to reduce stigma about homosexuality. The idea was that coming out could be a successful political strategy for the movement because it relied on the existing ties of affection and love between straights and queers, between friends, between family, parents and children, siblings, etc. Once straight people realized that they had queer family and friends, queer people hoped that they would then understand that the stigmas of homosexuality were based in hate and not reality, and that in coming out you could actually transform the way that straight America thought about homosexuality. Queer people also began to lobby to get rid of restrictions on queer life that had existed through most of the 20th century, particularly, obviously, laws against sex, because that was a problem, but also limits on constitutionally protected freedoms, such as the freedom of assembly. Queer people did not have the freedom of assembly for most of the 20th century, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. And they made real gains in the early 1970s in these goals. However, by the late 1970s, that very queer political organizing provoked an intense backlash. And by the late 1970s, you saw rollbacks, like laws being repealed that had been passed to protect queer people. Right, so queer people went into the HIV/AIDS epidemic in a defensive crouch. We were already under attack by the forces of backlash. And then in the spring of 1981, doctors in Los Angeles and New York City began to see severe immunosuppression among otherwise healthy men who had sex with men, most of whom identified as gay. And from the beginning, AIDS was characterized in the press and in medicine as a gay disease. But we now know that there had always been at least two, and probably more, AIDS epidemics in the United States. One in the queer male community of all races, right, so association with gayness or queerness, but also one among poor Black and Latinx communities that for a long time nobody noticed, right? And so the gay epidemic and the people of color, poor epidemic were actually running in tandem, but at the time it felt like the queer epidemic came first. We now know that that's not true. And shout out to Black feminism. AIDS is the ultimate intersectional issue. More about that in a minute. Now, there were several reasons why AIDS went unnoticed in communities of color. The first was just the novelty of a homosexual disease. Like, that was just so weird that people, and particularly doctors and scientists, didn't track race or didn't identify race as a factor in the way that they normally would have, that they should have done. This is a problem. I shouldn't be in charge of the clicker, it turns out. Right, so all right, here's gay liberation calling for come out wherever you are. All right, I'm gonna try to do better on that. So first is the novelty of the gay disease. Just people were like, that is so weird. Let's only look at that. It was also harder to see because poor people of color didn't have the access to health care that they should have. And so often died without a diagnosis. They were dying of AIDS, they just were never diagnosed with AIDS. But government policies also contributed to the epidemic, and those policies came from and had different racial impacts. So for the queer white community, the government ignored AIDS, right? And this is the Reagan administration, right, which had a very strong sort of Christian fundamentalist flavor to it. And they saw AIDS as God's just wrath on the homosexual, and they refused to help. In communities of color, however, the war on drugs and mass incarceration accelerated the invisible epidemic that no one was tracking. The government put men of color in jail for drug offenses that they did not send white men to jail for. These men of color were exposed to HIV through sex and drug use in prison, and when they had served their term, they returned to the community unaware of their infection, accelerating an epidemic that no one was tracking. Mass incarceration poured gasoline on a fire. HIV rates are still much higher in the Black and Latinx communities than the white community, and heterosexual transmission of HIV in those communities is much higher than it is for white people. Black women right now have a 15-time higher rate of HIV infection than white women do. A queer Black man in the United States has a 50% chance of contracting HIV in his lifetime. A similar white queer man has an 11% chance of contracting HIV in his lifetime. And both of those numbers are too high, and both of those numbers are entirely preventable should we decide to do that. But the disparity in race is striking. So I lived in the early epidemic's shadow, but not at its center. As a lesbian, I wasn't at high risk, although many of the gay men that I loved and worked with were. AIDS was written on the bodies of the people who had it in the form of KS lesions. Oops, so where's my outline? Sorry, guys. Look at all that stuff I just said. Okay, sorry. Right, so here is Kenneth Meeks at age 45, about 4 days before he died. And so you can see KS lesions on his face, right? There's no way that Kenneth can be closeted about the fact that he has HIV, and of course HIV is so tightly connected to homosexuality that he can't really be closeted about his homosexuality either. Also severe wasting, and now I'm going to show you a photograph of David Kirby just after he died, so content warning. This is David Kirby with his family, and you can see his emaciation. It's very obvious that David Kirby has died of AIDS. You could also see AIDS on the faces around you in queer meetings, and on the arms of homeless people begging in the streets. In the late 1980s, New York City was not a kind place. Nobody cared about AIDS because the people dying were queer or Black or Latinx or poor. And there's really no way to explain or express the grief and alienation you feel when you come out in that context. AIDS shaped my queerness, it shaped my activism, it shaped my academic interests. Fear and grief made me an alcoholic by the time I was 20 years old. That is not uncommon. We have 30% higher rates of drug and alcohol abuse in the queer community, so it's kind of typical there. And fear and grief dominated the queer response to AIDS in the early 1980s. Our anger was muted, and we were responding more with grief and fear. And in part that's because we were just busy caring for the dying, right? Like, being angry takes energy, and we didn't have the energy to get angry early on. But it was also because, as I said, we were in the middle of a backlash when the plague came. The queer community feared a hostile state response. The state response of the 20th century to queerness was very hostile, and it had recently, in the late 1970s, gotten worse again after an opening up after Stonewall. We didn't trust the state. It was hard to imagine that people who didn't care that we were dying would be willing to help us with a compassionate response. But as the losses mounted, for example, by 1983, we knew that 50% of the gay men in San Francisco had HIV, so astronomical numbers of HIV positivity. We began to change our mind about that, and we realized we couldn't do it alone, and we began to ask for help, but none came. And then, as the sociologist Deborah Gould argues, came the 1986 Supreme Court decision, Bowers v. Hardwick. So despite previous rulings where the Supreme Court had found a right to privacy for straight people, Griswold v. Connecticut, 1965, Loving v. Virginia, 1967, Roe v. Wade, 1973, Bowers actually reversed that and affirmed the right of states to criminalize adult consensual queer sex in private, right? And it was very clear that those earlier rulings that we had thought were an opening up to a right to privacy for all Americans were really just an opening up to straight Americans and mostly straight married Americans. By the time the Bowers decision came down, 16,000 people in the United States had died of AIDS. Hundreds of thousands were ill. Who even knew how many people were infected? And Bowers made it clear that our country saw us as criminals and not as fellow citizens. And people began to get very, very angry. And anger can, if directed outward, never directed into yourself, but if directed outward, anger can be very productive. I was in New York City in 1987, going to college and working as an AIDS educator when ACT UP emerged. This is actually a photograph from later, but it says, AIDS, where is your rage, right? ACT UP was a small group of people who managed to change the country's response to the epidemic, and it explicitly deployed rage as a political strategy. ACT UP was angry at society for not caring that people were dying because they were queer or poor or people of color. AIDS is the ultimate intersectional issue. I told you I'd get back to that. It brought together sexuality, race, poverty, and health in ways that almost no other issues did. ACT UP was dominated by white middle-class gay men, but a powerful alliance between women of all sexualities and people of color of all sexualities constantly challenged gay white men to grapple with the entirety of the AIDS epidemic, not just their part of it. So that's the background of ACT UP. Now I'm going to need your help to, from here on out, this isn't a lecture, it's a discussion, and we're going to break down the lessons of ACT UP through analyzing their graphics and their actions. I've framed this discussion as a series of lessons that ACT UP taught us about organizing and social protest so that you can take what you learned tonight back out into the world and make a difference. All righty, where is your rage? Lesson 1 from your ACT UP fairy godparents. Create the simplest, most eye-catching graphic that you can find to catch people's attention. Borrow from past symbols. Callbacks are fine. Don't use a lot of text. Think hard about your audience. Who do you want to reach? You don't have to be reaching everybody with the same poster. You can have different audiences for different graphics. So to give us an example of that, let's analyze silence equals death. Okay, so silence equals death. Let's talk about the image first. What do you see? We got a hand up.
Yeah, pink.
It's pink?
Yes.
Okay, and it's a triangle. Anybody know what a pink triangle, what's that a callback for? Holocaust. Excellent. And what? Like Holocaust, what part of it? Absolutely, yes, right. So Nazi Germany in the camps used the pink triangle to distinguish queer people from other people that they had also imprisoned in the death camps. To Jews, Roma people, all kinds of political prisoners, right? There's all kinds of people in the camps. And this was the symbol. Now what's really interesting about this is, well, let's talk about the big text. What does the big text say and what does it mean? How do you interpret that? E. Right, we're going to die, you're going to die, etc. Yeah, absolutely. It also is very much a callback itself to coming out, right? And basically arguing that we cannot get through this epidemic. We are dying unless we tell people who we are, because if they don't know, then they're going to still have those stigmas, and they're not going to care, and they're not going to give us the resources that we need to find a cure. They're not going to give us the resources we need to care for people as they die. They're not going to give us the resources that we need to educate people. Yes?
Silence, it makes it that if
Excellent. Yes, exactly. So they're trying to silence you so that they can forget you. They're trying to shut you up. They're kind of referring to civility, right? And this notion that we all have to be civil and not embarrass other people with our weird queerness. But it's like, well, if we do that, we're all going to die. Okay, we got a hand up over here. Yeah. We're struggling with our mic situation.
So the image is also demanding that you look at that pink triangle. You can't escape it.
Yes.
And I think
Because it's all that's there.
Yeah, and it's I think that it to me it harkens to you have to witness this. Mm-hmm. This is real.
So it's
like,
about
without
speech,
a witness, we're not real.
But it's also about witnessing.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Hand over here. Oh, Judy, yes.
I think it created a lot of awareness about font choices.
Excellent. Font choices. Say more.
Pictura, I mean, it's really bold, right?
Yes.
Like ever since that, I've been really self-conscious about font.
You know, AIDS changed so much, Judy. AIDS changed so much. And there actually are a couple, and I'm going to reference these in later in the talk, there are a couple of really excellent memoirs now of people who created this artwork. And there is a lot about font. Judy's absolutely right. We had a hand up here.
I was actually working at San Francisco General Hospital from 1986 until 2006, so that was interesting. But because that's where I did my residency. But I noticed your T-shirts do not match the poster, and your T-shirts match my memory of the poster. And the poster has that big space, and I'm wondering when that space, which someone just brought up, went away.
That is an excellent question, and I don't know. Sasha, do you know?
To put it on a t-shirt, it would just... So if you put it on a t-shirt, it would just be formatted differently. The black was a huge point for the people who created this image. They thought it was just as important as the pink triangle of the vastness of the black in the image. But if you were to put it on a t-shirt, it would be like way down
Here, it would be tucked into my pants.
So these
are
t-shirts
from
are
ACT UP.
from ACT UP. The t-shirts back then, can you verify?
I have no idea. I mean, I had one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these are from ACT UP. We ordered them.
We did. We did. So another interesting question is this tiny print here, right? So you're walking down the street, you see this poster, and we're going to show you images of that in the middle. The small text at the bottom reads, why is Reagan silent about AIDS? What is really going on at the Centers for Disease Control, the Federal Drug Administration, the Vatican? Gays and lesbians are not expendable. Use your power, vote, boycott, defend yourselves, turn anger, fear, and grief into action. Why make that text so small? Way in the back.
You can't read it if you're just walking by, so you need to stop and take it in, and it cleans up the general presentation to have the details.
Excellent, right? So visually, it still gives you that very clean pink triangle, very simple, bold, white letters, black background, but it gives you a lot of context, and it draws you in. Yes, striped shirt person.
I was going to say the most important point about this is to grab people's attention, but obviously it's also important to give them context. So if people are interested enough to stop, then they can read the things below and get the context, but then the image will still be big enough to grab everybody's attention.
Right, so like if you had put all of those words on the poster, far fewer people would have walked up to see what was going on, right? And it would have been too busy. Excellent. So let me see, do I have, oh no, I don't have that in here. I thought I had a quotation in here. Help, help. Wait, no, I do. So Grand Fury is ACT UP's main art collective, and as they explain, quote, we are making the audience create a physical gesture, move their body towards the poster, you are here. Now, who is the audience of this poster, do you think? Yes?
It's primarily for queer people, and actually, if I had to guess, given how much black space there is, especially given how little the government was helping, this poster is kind of saying the only people who can help you right now are ourselves and our community. Only the people who have the pink triangle can help you. No one else is willing.
Right, and
you have to
what would
stand
a
up.
straight person in the 1980s know about a pink triangle, do you think? Not very much, right? It's kind of an obscure queer reference. I mean, queer people had been using it. Let's see if I can do the clicker again. Look at me go, woo! Queer people had been using it. Oh, no, there is, whoa, oh, all kinds of things. No, heavens, all right. Oh, no, it's not on here. I thought it was on here. All right, never mind. They had been using it during gay liberation, right? So queer people knew about it, but straight people really didn't. And I think it's really interesting that this first graphic, oh, hell, sorry, heck. Oh my heck! I should not be in charge of this. Okay. Where is your rage? Oh no, I am there. Oh, okay. There we go. Sorry, guys. Okay. Lesson 1. One more. Oh, thank heavens. Woo! This poster is actually created before ACT UP, and ACT UP comes out of this poster, right? So this is actually done by the Silence Equals Death Collective or the Lavender Hill Gang. I can't remember. Silence Equals Death Collective, right, who are a bunch of young gay guys in New York City, a lot of whom were both artists and actually working professionally as graphic designers in advertising because not a lot of money in art, right? And so doing their art on the side. And so they you know, Judy's font point, right? Like they thought about all of this and what they were doing. And then when ACT UP was formed a few months later, and they just put these out, right? So let me show you what that looks like because it's so cool. Lesson 2, from your ACT UP fairy godparents, find venues, places, and formats that will get you the most visibility for your message. These can be trash spaces. And by that I mean like, they can be construction site walls and like the fences around stuff. They just have to be in a place with high traffic, right? And that's really useful, right? Because you don't have to pay for those spaces. So here we have, right, this is actually, sorry, we borrowed this from TikTok Boom. I remember in New York City, like just construction site walls just covered with ACT UP, big ACT UP posters from the 80s, but we couldn't find that as a photo online. And so we went with TikTok Boom, which by the way is great, and you should go watch it. Right, and then this is actually original, right? You can see again that they're wheat pasting this all over this city, right? And so you're walking by on your way to work or on your way to the grocery store and you suddenly see this as a queer person and you're like, oh, I need to go look at this enormous multiplicity of pink triangles, right? You can put it anywhere, and it will get people paying attention. And then, okay, so let's see, where are we going to go? What? Yes?
Did you talk about this yet, the positionality of the triangle? I mean, we were always taught that in Nazi times, it was pointing down.
Yes.
And there was this inversion that made for,
So Judy is saying that when the Nazis used it, it was flipped the other way, right? So that the wide end of the triangle was at the top. My understanding was that that was a mistake. Yes. Like that they literally, that the Grand Fury people were like, we don't know, and they just put it up this way. Okay. So Sasha's got to tell us. Sasha is the art historian.
So they spent 6 months creating the Silence Equals Death poster, and when deciding on the pink triangle, they said, is it up or down? And one guy said, I was just at Auschwitz. I was there, you guys. I promise it's pointing upwards. And Oliver Johnson was supposed to fact check it. And he said, no, yeah, it's good. He didn't actually fact check it.
It's hard to check.
Yeah. And so they sent it to the printing press as is and then learned after the fact that it was the wrong way. And so they reclaimed it instantly as, no, this is what we meant to do. It's a vision of hope, and it was on purpose.
Graphic artists that they were, absolutely. All righty. And then the other thing that's interesting, though, is that these kinds of spaces are not the only places that ACT UP use the Silence Equals Death graphic, right? So why put it on buttons? Why put it on a T-shirt? What does that do that a graphic that you just see while you're walking by can't do? Yeah.
I feel like it humanizes it, like it provides a face to the issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. Other interpretations? Yeah. Riffs?
Mm-hmm. Just like say, hey, this is something that needs to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And like we shouldn't just be like keeping it quiet
Mm-hmm.
and pretending like it's not going on when it is going on.
Right, and as an individual, I'm going to make the choice to start that conversation with you, right? Yeah.
I'm part of the in-group. That's kind of what it will
Yeah.
tell you. Where there's a pin and maybe like not everybody understands it, but those people who do understand, they know that you're helping them or you're an ally who understands what they're going through.
Excellent, exactly. So wait, I'm looking for the notes here. Grand Fury did say that, but I cut it. Uh-oh. But basically, they made exactly that argument, which is that seeing an actual person wearing that T-shirt makes you realize that you are not alone, makes you realize that other people are struggling with this issue. It is a callback to coming out again, but in a very different way, right? Walking past a flyer or even putting a flyer up is brave, but it isn't brave in that individualizing way that outs you, that puts you in the line of danger so that you can communicate to your fellow people, right? So again, this is really communication between queers. It's not communication between straights and queers until, of course, straights eventually figure out what the pink triangle is and what's going on and start paying attention, which is eventually what we wanted them to do. So that's what T-shirts and buttons do, right? And that's why we did button making, right? Is that you can pin buttons on things. Sometimes it's cool to pin buttons on things, right? And you can speak to other people about your own political commitments and who you are. And remember, coming out was a strategy of gay liberation, but a lot of people in the 70s didn't do it for everyone, right? Because there was huge costs. That's why, for example, it is still actually taboo in the queer community. If a straight person asks you if another person is queer, you have to be like, well, you should probably ask them, right? That's not because you're not allowed to come out for other people. Everybody should come out, but all of us need to judge our particular danger. We need to assess how dangerous that would be to our job, to our relationships, to our family, to our housing. Like that is, it's too big a risk, right? And so gay community ethics have always said, you don't come out for other people, right? Everybody should come out, but you don't do that for other people. So, okay, so let's take a look at ACT UP's protest posters to see what ACT UP's broader political analysis was. What did they want? How did they set up trying to get it? So lesson 3 from your ACT UP fairy godparents, be coalitional. Find as many people impacted by your issue as you can. Get them involved, even if they're impacted in different ways, right? Which means you're going to have to expand your analysis to include their experience as well, which means, by the way, that you're going to have to listen to them, right? So develop an intersectional analysis which explains why these specific groups are all in the same or similar boats and connect to other social movements. All righty. So this is one of ACT UP's or Grand Fury's very, very early posters, AIDS 1 in 61. It's violating the rule we told you about earlier about too much text. But I will read it to you. So 1 in every 61 babies in New York City is born with AIDS or born HIV antibody positive. So why is the media telling us that heterosexuals aren't at risk? Because these babies are black, these babies are Hispanic. Ignoring color ignores the facts of AIDS. Stop racism, fight AIDS. So, and then the exact same thing in Spanish. Why the exact same thing in Spanish? Yeah, because there's a lot of Spanish-speaking people in New York City who are at risk for AIDS and don't know that they're at risk for AIDS. And there's also a bunch of babies who are being born who are either black or Latino who are being born HIV positive. Now, by the way, what else does that mean that 1 in 61 babies in New York City are being born with HIV? What does that tell us about the epidemic? Excellent. It affects heterosexual people. What else? Yeah.
It's not always people who are part of the LGBTQ community that it comes from. Like, they're like, it could come from like different varieties, like heterosexual, like, and sometimes we just don't know where it comes from. So,
Right, at all.
I think it's just very important to be like mindful about it.
In the middle?
Cis women are giving birth. Cis women with HIV.
Yes. What this means, because the thing is, a lot of children who are born with HIV do what's called serorevert, which means you're born with your mom's immune system, right? And so you're going to be born with the markers for HIV, but you may not have it. And so actually about 60% of babies at the time would serorevert, although that means 40% would not, right? And they did have HIV. But yeah, that's in 61, like 1 in 61 women who are delivering babies in New York City have HIV. And most of them probably don't even know that they have HIV, right? So this is a huge unseen problem. And ACT UP is just putting it right in your face. Now let's talk a little bit about the graphic. Also, anything else you want to talk about with the language? Yes?
I was just going to say with the baby, there's a sense of innocence there. Whereas like when they know it's queer people doing it, it's bad. But when we see that a baby has it, yeah, you have more empathy or there's innocence.
Well, and also empathy, but then also we have this disaster on our hands that is going unseen, right? That this number is so high. Eliza?
The graphic of the baby to me is super striking because it's kind of, you know, its limbs are all, splayed like a baby that is, you know, crying for its mom or in distress. And so I think...
Yeah, it's not a happy baby.
It's not a happy baby, and it's like pretty eye-catching. Like it's the only graphic on there, so it's pretty unsettling, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And also to me, I mean, it is a doll, it's not a baby, and so to me it also looks a little bit like it's a thrown away baby. You know what I mean? Like that we don't care about this baby. Yes?
And this may just reflect the doll models they had to work from. But this is, to me, a pretty clearly white baby.
It is, that's interesting.
And I wonder if that was on purpose to catch people's attention, but then they tell us that there's a reason we're not noticing it.
Right, that's great. Sasha, do we know about the choice of the white baby doll versus a baby doll of color? I mean, there definitely would have been fewer, this is pre-American girl dolls. But I mean, that's a really interesting point that I hadn't actually really ever thought about. Right, so what's interesting, and Sasha found this in her research, is that Grand Fury actually considered this to be a failure because there was so much text. And therefore, people didn't really read it in the way that they wanted to. Of course, they had to use Spanish because they were trying to reach people, which is actually an interesting question here that I haven't asked, which is what's the audience here? Is it queer? No, not really. I mean, it's everybody, right? So yes, of course, queer people can be like, 1 in 61, that's terrible. But, oh no, you might want to plug in your PC. It is, Sasha says, it is.
It's not.
It's not. Okay. Sasha to the rescue, woo, plugged in. Yay. All right, did we have 1 or 2 other comments? And then I want to move on. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna say that I think this is after Ryan White got AIDS, and so like it was becoming more popular to acknowledge that like this isn't just like a single person group issue, and like it isn't something that, because like I think any issue gets more empathy when people can't blame it on your behavior. So
think of the children.
A lot bigger because he got it, and then suddenly people had like less excuses to pretend they didn't care because it could affect their kids.
Right.
Which is why people
Excellent.
care.
Yeah. I feel like I'm biased.
The
against
baby
this
doll also kind of makes me think of like innocence of childhood. So like this child is innocent of getting AIDS. The AIDS was provided by their mother. It's not, the consequence is then delivered to them. So then that factor of innocence of childhood is now being affected by AIDS from now on.
Well, and to connect your comment to her comment, right, that may help in getting more resources for HIV. But for a bunch of gay white men, which is basically what Grand Fury is, right, to do this shows their coalitional politics, right, shows that they understand that the epidemic that they're facing is actually very different than what the press is saying the epidemic is, right, and that they need to tell people, right. So this is absolutely a plea to heterosexuals to understand that AIDS is a virus and that doesn't really care who you are. It is also a warning to communities of color in New York City to say, be careful, look out, the disease is in your community and it's in it a lot more, 1 in 61, than anybody would ever think that it is, right? So start thinking about AIDS, start protecting yourself, right? This is a terrifying number. I also remember seeing this in the subways. And so that, I remember, and so it was interesting to me that Grand Fury thought it was a failure because I found it to be very, very effective. Okay, so, woo, where are we? 1 in 61, yay, we did it. Okay. So AIDS behind bars, again, very early, 1988. Again, a lot of text, so they are sort of violating that aspect of their own rule. 25% test positive. People with AIDS in prison live half as long as those treated outside. Let's put AIDS education and treatment behind bars. And then in very little writing, it says prison authorities know that effective AIDS education, condoms, and dental dams reduce risk, yet these are not available to prisoners in New York State. To protest this callous negligence, send a condom to Marion Borum, Deputy Director for Program Services, New York Department of Corrections, right? And then join us in protest on Tuesday, May 3rd, blah, 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 right? Oh, but actually at the offices for the New York State Department of Correction, right? So this is actually a protest poster as well as just an informational protester. So what are you seeing? How are you thinking about the image and how it's interacting with the text? Yes, ma'am.
It makes me feel like when I see the jail cell with the person behind, it's like we're punishing someone for having AIDS. Like saying, oh, you have AIDS, or like there's something wrong with you and you deserve to be punished. When we should also be providing the education and resources and treatment in how to treat it. And I don't think it's like just something that I think we just need to have an open mind to like give out those resources of what they could do to help treat it.
Excellent. Got one in the middle? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So I think this really does a good job at representing like the loneliness and isolation of the epidemic. And I think secondly, it kind of dives into like healthcare in prison. And so to me, it begs the question of like, okay, if the expectation is that if I get injured in prison, if I break my arm while I'm in jail, if I'm pregnant while I'm in jail, like if I have any sort of condition like that, the expectation is that I get some sort of care. So
actually,
why?
Constitutionally, yes, you do.
Exactly. Like it's required by law. So why, if I'm HIV positive or if I have why should that be different? How is that not a medical need as well?
Well, and also, how is it not a prevention medical need, right? Like, this is going to cost us so much more money and pain and suffering. And it's interesting because prisons basically denied that there was sex and sexual assault and drug use in prisons. Many states actually had laws against distributing condoms because they were like, we can't distribute condoms because sex in prison is illegal. And it's like, but it's still happening, right? So we need to do something about it. And then, of course, it's also, again, a reference to mass incarceration and the differential and the war on drugs and differential racial sentencing, right? And it's basically saying, again, coalition politics. Like, we understand what's accelerating this epidemic, and we need you, the public, to start understanding that. But also, again, we're having a protest, and there's two different ways you can participate, which is super smart, right? Maybe you're not free or don't want to go to the protest on Tuesday, May 3rd at 4 p.m. at the offices of the New York State Department of Correction, but you can also protest by just throwing a condom in an envelope and mail. It's like, oh, you can't provide condoms? Here's some condoms. You can go ahead and provide. All right, Polly.
Again, the use of like the black space in it feels really like we're not seeing the full image of a human being. We're just seeing the eyes behind bars, and it feels like really a reflection of like we're forgetting about these people and leaving them in the dust, and it's not okay.
Well, and literally to connect to the point about healthcare, they are on our watch. They can't do anything. They are imprisoned. The state is literally responsible for them and is not protecting them in the way that it should. All right, one more, and then we're going to go.
Okay. It made me also think of they live half as long. So this is a death sentence. Like, and you have the behind bars, all this stuff. You can think of that in your head and correspond that with, it's a death sentence to have this in prison.
Absolutely. Excellent point. All righty. Okay, so one that was a little more effective, and again, remember, all of these are up in the subways. And did I not tell you about that? I should have told you about, did I do my subway thing? Okay, well, what was fun, actually, though, in the New York subways, the New York subways at the time, so Grand Fury designed its posters so that they were exactly the size of New York subway poster advertisements. And at the time, they didn't lock those down. They do now. I was just there, I checked. They're definitely locked now. But at the time, you could pop out the plexiglass, take your ACT UP poster, and put it in front of a poster for tattoo removal or ambulance chasing lawyers or whatever. And we used to do that. We used to walk up and down the New York City subway cars. The other thing that's nice about a subway, this didn't work as well with buses. Why doesn't it work with buses? Because there's a driver on a bus, right? And they're going to be like, excuse me, miss. You know, I'm not very tall. Get down off the seat while the bus is moving and stop monkeying around with the advertising, right? Subways, no, right? There's a driver, but he's like in the first car and he's not paying attention to you because he has to pay attention to the signals and the rats and all of the other things, right? So it's New York. There's a lot of rats in the subway. So that was another really fascinating thing, right, was that you could get ACT UP graphics in front of a lot of people. And so they literally designed them to fit in those spaces perfectly and actually kind of look like they belonged there, which is kind of fascinating as well. Because the thing is, New York City subways have also always sort of had public health announcements and stuff like that. And so it was written, you'd be sitting in the subway and then you'd be like, oh yeah, I put that up last week, or whatever, right? Or, you know, like, oh, I want to go to a protest, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Warning. Sasha's telling me warning. Okay. So, warning, enormous erect penis. I'm sorry that we're just going to see it. But it's an ACT UP graphic, right? But and by the way, it's not a trigger warning, because we're not allowed to give those anymore. This is just a huge erect penis warning. There we go. Right? So sexism rears its unprotected head. Men use condoms or beat it. AIDS kills women. And then it says Spring AIDS Action 88, 9 days of nationwide AIDS-related action and protest. All right, so what do you think of this poster? How's the image interacting with the text? Yes?
So one of the things I was going to say about actually all of these images, you know, in terms of like, yes, the primary audience was folks in the queer communities, and I would argue that cisgendered and heterosexual folks who were seeing this, who maybe, you know, didn't otherwise have knowledge of the queer community and everything, they get brought into it with healthy shame.
You mean like you straight people, you straight men,
yeah,
get your act
also,
together.
Yes,
Yeah.
And like with each of these, it's about like, so what are you doing here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
why are you part of the problem?
Yes, exactly. And the thing about this is there's a great book called Ejaculate Responsibly, and that really kind of turns a lot of like, you know, women's healthcare kind of on its head. Like, why are we, you know, doing this? And it's a similar thing. A lot of the responsibility is put onto women around safe sex, you know, family planning, all of that sort of a thing. And this is really kind of, it's challenging that paradigm.
Yeah, and it's saying, you know, straight men, if you care about women, which by the way, if you're having sex with them, we hope you do, right, then you need to take responsibility. Birth control is almost always a women's issue, but it's not. It's an everybody who's engaging in sex with each other issue, as is all of this disease prevention, right? So I agree, it's totally turning it on its head. And also, what is the suggestion? If you don't want to use a condom, what should you do? You should masturbate. Yes, exactly, right? Like, don't worry. There are ways for you to feel better, right? There are ways for you to deal with your erect penis that do not involve infecting a woman with HIV. In the front? Ah!
It's framed like this monstrous kaiju thing that's gonna kill people. Like Godzilla.
Godzilla! Excellent. Right. I saw this in a subway car, by the way. So, and that's kind of astounding, right? Like, just imagine you're on your morning commute, you're a little sleepy, you got your little Walkman headphones in. Does anybody remember in your cassette mixtape that your girlfriend made for you, right? And you're like, oh, okay, that's all right, I'm awake this morning. Absolutely, right? So it's about sort of getting at that analysis of who's responsible, whose attention do we need to get, how can we help stop this? Yes?
I was just going to say, I think it's very interesting that this one uses humor, whereas the other ones have been much more informational.
Yes.
And it's presented for straight men and straight women. It feels like there's something there where
Yeah, we're mocking
men,
you.
Yeah, men can't read. They can only look at a giant penis.
Yeah, I think that's true. Okay, way in the back. Run, Oliver, run.
With the poster, it's for anyone. It kind of grabs you by the eye, so it's mostly
Grabs you?
It's mostly curiosity that gets to you.
Yeah.
So your eyes first go to the penis, then you start to wander a little bit, then you read everything, then you go.
I can't look away. Absolutely, yes. It's very gripping. It's very gripping. And it also is, I mean, it is doing similar work to the other work that we saw, right? It's similar, but very different than 1 in 61, right? So yes, okay, one more, and then let's keep going. I don't want to keep you guys all night.
I think like with pretty much all PSAs, like all really good PSAs, it's really shocking.
Yes.
And that's the best part of it,
Yeah.
because things that are really controversial get people talking about it. It's like, oh, I saw a giant dick on the subway. It's like,
Yes.
well, I need
Really?
to see
Which-
that now.
which
Like, yeah,
line?
which one? Like, that's disgusting. Let's take a look at it. That informs people, and then it spreads the message, and that's awesome. So
Absolutely.
yeah, no, it's great.
I also think there's an interesting queer aesthetic, right? That queer folk actually are much more comfortable, maybe not today, but at the time, with explicit discussions of sexuality, with explicit imagery around sexuality. And so it's kind of taking that and shoving it in straight people's face and saying, you need to pay attention, this is actually your problem, you're causing this problem. Stop being such a prissy, right? Like if you're gonna have sex, be responsible. Yes, Mary Carol?
I think it's super important to point out that this isn't just for heterosexual men and women, because the men who, in large part, are infecting the women are bisexual or closeted gay.
Well, or IV drug using.
Or IV drug using, for
Yeah.
sure, but
Or partners of it, yeah.
it's not just for heterosexual.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that's interesting is that the gay community comes up with safer sex guidelines for HIV by 1982, I think. Sasha, check. Okay, 1982. Right, and that includes condoms, which, by the way, gay men had, gay men thought they were going to get a pass on condoms. They were like, well, it's stigma, I'm going to get fired from my job, but I don't have to use a condom, right? I don't have to worry about getting somebody pregnant or whatever, right? And so there's an interesting way in which, like, what they're really saying to straight people is, like, we've actually figured this out. We know what you need to do. And back in the 1980s and the 1990s until 1996, the only thing, well, and even then, the only thing that you knew you could do to prevent HIV was to have safer sex. And if you were gonna have intercourse, you needed to use a condom. And what else, by the way? What else is very helpful with a condom? Lube, thank you, yes. No one ever said, oh no, there's too much lube in here. Whoop. You know, like there's just, that's not a thing. That doesn't happen. Okay, so, right, so this is a very interesting dialogue with the straight community riding the subways in New York, which, by the way, unlike here, is everyone, right? Because why would you get in a cab? That's expensive and slow, right? So, and it's a conversation, but it's also, again, very intersectional, right? It's about how do we talk about what we know about the entirety of the epidemic, not just the queer epidemic, which is where a lot of these artists are coming from. All righty, that's enough of you. Chew out of there. Okay, lesson 4 from your Act Up Fairy Godparents. Challenge the existing narrative and replace it with your own. And your comments have already started to get us to that existing narrative, but we're just going to look at it. All right, what's going on here? What's this saying? You guys are muttering at me. I can't hear you.
Stop blaming the victim.
Okay, stop blaming the victim.
Because there's such right-wing condemnation on a religious right, soapbox.
Oh no, Cindy, get down. Get down off the box. Actually, here's the box. Go stand on it. Yep, Antelope Island. We have it on tape. The legislature discussed quarantining people with AIDS in Utah on Antelope Island. I mean, it's conveniently located. It's only got one road. The buffalo don't care, right? So why not? No, seriously, that was happening. That was a thing. Okay, yes.
One of the things that I am drawn to on this poster is the inaccurate depiction, but nonetheless the caduceus that represents physicians. It doesn't actually, but It's trying
Is it
to.
upside down like the triangle?
No, it's
or-
got 2 snakes. It's only supposed to have 1.
Snakes, okay.
But let's assume
Transparency.
they are trying to call out physicians. I think that's a really important thing because in 1988, there were physicians who were refusing to treat. There was an orthopedic surgeon at San Francisco General Hospital who was wearing a full-on spacesuit and refusing to have patients and was in Time magazine, right? So I think this is also aimed at physicians and the healthcare systems.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a new narrative, right? It's saying the old narrative that people with AIDS deserve it because they are bad people, because they are queer, or because they are poor, or because they are people of color and they deserve what they get. They must have done something bad. HIV isn't a disease or a virus. It is a moral statement, right? And they are challenging that narrative and they are saying, no, all people with AIDS are innocent. E?
Yeah, I was going to say that also there's a significant amount of, like, we get the straight public to care when it's about babies, when it's about, like, right? There's the sense of innocence is part of the thing that's drawing people to actually caring about the epidemic.
Yes.
And so part of what's important about this is not just saying, or that it is directly saying, like, okay, but that's all people with AIDS, right? That this isn't, if you care about babies, then you should also care about everyone else who's getting this.
Absolutely, yes. Excellent. All righty. So let's see. Whoop. So we're going to keep going. Lesson 5. I got to get through my lessons, people. From your ACT UP Fairy godparents, take your message to the people who have the most power to address the problem. That's complicated. We're going to talk about that in a second. And explain how and why they have the power and what you think they should do about it. What's happening here? What's it doing? Wow. I thought the erect penis was going to get you, but it turns out it's the American flag. All right, we got a question, we got a comment way, way in the back. Yeah, you. Apparently. Right, so what do you guys think of this graphic? Right, it kind of, speaking of shocking, right, like it seemed more shocking than the penis. Although I did warn you about the penis. Maybe that was why. Yeah.
Well, I guess the red of the American flag is supposed to represent blood of wounded soldiers or whatever. So now it's instead being painted over with people who have died of AIDS, and it's the politicians' fault that it is like that.
Excellent. Yeah.
And like it also mentions like July 4th, 1989, like America's Independence Day. Not sure what anniversary that is, like 213 or something.
Who knows?
But
I should know. I'm a historian. I don't. Oh, the revolution. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. All right. Excellent. Right. So it's both using this graphic and then it's connecting it to the day of action. Right. So it's sort of saying, look, the 4th of July is about the American Revolution. It's about the founding of our country. What is our country doing? Why is our country ignoring the illness, the deaths, and suffering of citizens, right? Citizens who are gay and black and Hispanic and poor. Like, why? Why is this what our country is doing, right? So it's making a deliberate plea / angry accusation about patriotism.
I think it's also reclaiming the American flag.
Yes, we need to do that. Guys, we need to do that. I'm so tired, like, when they're banning the pride flag, they're like, but we can have the American flag. And I'm like, the American flag is our flag, right? So we need to be taking the American flag to our protests and be saying the American flag doesn't just mean a set of values that are, you know, from my perspective, conservative, reactionary, whatever, right? The American flag is my flag too. Excellent point. All righty, rant, rant, rant. Here we go. All right, love this one. Made a bunch of these myself. Okay, so the government has blood on its hands, 1 AIDS death every half hour. You've got blood on your hands, Ed Koch. So Ed Koch is the mayor of New York in the 1980s. You've got blood on your hands, Stephen Joseph. Stephen Joseph is the Surgeon General of New York in the 1980s. So this is a fascinating poster. What are they doing here? Bash.
They're taking the imagery of blood that is pretty
graphic. Yeah, and it's so flexible. Yeah, in the middle.
I was going to say naming and shaming.
Naming and shaming, absolutely. Also in the middle.
Thank you. I think to me, some of these look like a child's hand.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know if that was intentional.
The little ones.
Some of them
yeah.
look smaller. Some of them look like children's hands. And so I think possibly we were going to represent, HIV positive babies and children, and just another reminder that this is affecting them too.
Right, that their blood is being spilled too. Yeah.
I think the image of blood is particularly powerful because HIV is a bloodborne disease, right?
Excellent point.
So it's saying you are the contagion.
Yeah, you government are, nicely said. Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons I'm so fond of this poster is that when I was so I went to Columbia College, but learned quickly that all the girls were at Barnard. And so I joined the Barnard AIDS education group, and I ended up running it. And Barnard, we gave out dental dams because that was a way to prevent woman-to-woman transmission, and actually all kinds of other transmission, by the way. Plenty of people, straight guys I've heard, sometimes do things that require dental dams. And Barnard was so mad. There was one young woman that they really didn't like because she was depressed. She was lovely, but she was depressed like some people are in college. And so she was a little bit unkempt and she was a little bit butch looking, and they decided she was a lesbian, which she was not. And they did not think I was a lesbian, which I was. And so they shut us down. And Barnard College, which is like not Barnard College itself, but it's in ground zero, like Southern Harlem. They like to call it Morningside Heights, but it's Southern Harlem, right? Huge rates of HIV infection. And they're willing to shut us down because we're trying to teach girls how not to catch HIV, right? And we're handing out condoms. And so somebody had one of the little dot matrix printers, that has the little holes on the side, and it goes chicka, 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 right? And so you could just print this out and get yourself some red poster paint and make yourself some posters, right? And so we, without ACT UP, all on our own, we had these plastered Barnard and Columbia with these posters calling out the Barnard administration for shutting us down. Right, and then it was hilarious. Then I did some undercover work and pretended I wanted to be part of their AIDS. It was ridiculous. It was so much fun. Right, so all of that, right, is going on in this. But what's so awesome about this is the way that you can adapt it to any situation cheaply. Anybody can do it, right? So it's a graphic that has enormous power, right? You guys interpreted it and read it really well. But also, anybody can do this, right? It's not hard. And it's kind of fun. And you get your red handprints everywhere. All righty. So calling out individual people, love this one. What are we doing? 5 hours, 5 years, ACT UP New York 2000. What's happening? Wow, you guys are quiet. Come on, read it. It's not hard. Yes, E.
It's mostly just calling out sort of what we, both government, but also like popular culture, sort of in people in general, sort of what we care about and focus on, and particularly sort of the government spending on not on things or on defense money, which is used to harm people, as opposed to healthcare, which is supposed to be used to help people.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Eliza?
Thank you. I think also it kind of illustrates the point that defense, it's not active. It's not active. And meanwhile, there are actively people dying because of this. So the clock imagery to me is really powerful.
Yes.
Time is running out and you could be doing something about it.
Excellent. Yes. Over here. Yeah, you.
Yeah, and I think compared to maybe listing out the amount of money the U.S. spends on defense versus healthcare would have been less effective than this, because you can feel how much time 5 hours is versus 5 years, and that might also be reflective of
delays in healthcare due to like under funding.
Excellent, right? So time is a more effective measure that people are going to understand better than the actual money.
I also think it's interesting that this one is about healthcare. It's not about AIDS. So this
Excellent.
reaches a much wider audience.
Right, so we're moving outward and we're sort of questioning, again, American patriotism and what our priorities are and why isn't healthcare seen as important to national defense, right? Why are we spending all this, why do we define defense as the military rather than defining defense as the healthcare of our citizens? All right, one more in the back.
Whenever anything needs to improve, the first and foremost argument against it is the budget. The healthcare especially tends to be underfunded. And so when you look at where that money can go, the very easiest place to look is the budget defense, which is bloated and fails audits consistently. You just have to look at the numbers and you feel constipated.
Which is a healthcare issue.
Yeah. Yep.
Excellent.
So there you go.
So there we go. All righty, good read, people. All right, lesson 6 from your Act Up Fairy God parents. Engage in symbolic, nonviolent, non-cooperation, ahimsa, right? Gandhi / Martin Luther King Jr. cooperation that matches your goals and your analysis, right? So yes, protest, but protest smart, right? Make sure that you are targeting and being symbolic in various ways. So why, and I'm getting a time warning just so you know, are you guys okay if we go a little over? Or you want me to stick? Okay, people, yeah, ha ha ha. Time warning. I asked them to give me a time warning. It's not their fault. Why would the queer community do a kiss-in? Bash? It's fun, Sebastian says. Yeah, it is totally fun. I mean, especially if you like the person, people, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, right? So it's the silence equals death, but visual, right? And it's that queer people need to be seen. It's also probably, yeah, E?
I was just going to say that there's also a lot of misinformation about how the virus is passed. And so this is one way of sort of countering that misinformation.
Yeah, you can't get it by kissing. Kissing doesn't kill. Excellent. Read my lips, kiss in. Other, yeah.
On the topic of it being fun, great way to get people to show up.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the visual, right? There's the fact that queer affection is seen as far more shocking than straight affection, right? Like, I love straight people. Some of my best friends are straight. I just wish they wouldn't rub my face in it all the time, right? Yeah.
It's also very provocative that it's military members.
Yes.
These men, they hang out a long time on beds. They are
I mean, as the YMCA, as the village people would say, in the Navy, you sail the 7 seas with a bunch of guys for a really long time. Yeah. They got criticized for the women, by the way, because the women aren't actually kissing, and so they had to do a different one.
The visuals are pre-1980s, so
Yeah.
like the 20s?
Yeah.
Maybe 40s?
Probably the 40s. Yeah, that looks World War II to me. Excellent. So she's saying we've always been doing this, right? Like that to use this vintage visual, first of all, I think makes it a little bit less threatening, but also makes ultimately a very threatening argument, which is like, we've always been here, right? And we've got the pictures to prove it. Like, we've got receipts. Come on. So this is fascinating. So there's a kiss-in, right? And then it's so popular. It is actually the most popular of it made the most money of Grand Fury's various products, right? So then it gets turned into this graphic. Kissing doesn't kill, greed and indifference do, right? Which is excellent, right? It's like, no, again, you can't get HIV from kissing, but you definitely can die of it if your country is greedy and indifferent to your health and your well-being. And then, of course, we've got various mixed couples and actually women kissing as opposed to this historical, soulful nonsense. Oh, just look into each other's eyes. That's all we're going to do. No, I didn't sign up for that. All right. And then this becomes such a popular campaign that we got on buses. Woo! Right, so then it becomes a public bus announcement, right, that and I mean cities that are struggling with AIDS, right, so ACT UP San Francisco, ACT UP Chicago, ACT UP New York, actually managed to negotiate with the transportation departments of their cities and get these posters on their buses, which is amazing, because like, you can't even see that on television in the late 1980s, but suddenly you're just at a bus stop, and you see queer kissing and interracial kissing? What? Right, so amazing, right? Very, very effective campaign. Again, questioning sort of our priorities, our understandings, our misinformation, and saying, hey, pay attention to AIDS. And by the way, you can't get it from kissing, but stop being greedy and start paying attention. All righty, so that's one. Lesson 7 from your ACT UP Fairy Godparents: be prepared at public protests. Know the rules. That is, what will get you arrested and what will not. People can and should take the risk of being arrested, but they should plan for it. Also, your fellow activists, they may decide not to get arrested. That's okay. Not everybody has to get arrested. Some of us have mortgages, right? Some of us have kids. Some of us have, right? So like, don't judge your fellow protesters, but be intentional, right? And you know, at this protest, I'm gonna get arrested. At that protest, I'm not gonna get arrested. And so that's important as well. Know the rules. And the university has not provided us with enough education around what the rules of public protests are recently. I would like a little more education about what we are allowed to do and what we are not allowed to do, so that we can plan effective protests that don't rebound and hurt us, right? And to me, that is the university's responsibility, because it is the university's policies, right? And so they have to tell us what they are. All right. Train and deploy people to manage communications and relations with the police during protest. In ACT UP, these folks were called marshals, and they coordinated the protests, kept track of people who were getting arrested and what happened to them, and also made sure that they knew the drugs those people were on, because people with AIDS need their drugs, right? And how to get them those drugs while those people were in jail, and work with the police and the press. Marshals were not supposed to be arrested, though sometimes the police got out of hand and they were, right? So, but having marshals to coordinate this stuff is incredibly important. Now, obviously it's important when you're dealing with health issues, right? You cannot let people who have AIDS or even just HIV go into prison, have no idea where their meds are, not lose track of them in the system. We cannot do that. But in general, it's incredibly helpful to have marshals, right? So this is from ACT UP's website, and this is some of the rules of marshal training, right? And people were trained, and they knew what they were going to do, and they volunteered to be marshals at particular protests. But just general rule, know what you're doing. All right, this is ACT UP's takeover of the FDA. Now, this is fascinating, because ACT UP had been protesting at a lot of places that had power, right? The White House is symbolic. The Supreme Court, it's symbolic. But then they were like, you know what? The president doesn't actually run the FDA. And it's the FDA, it's the Federal Drug Administration, that we need to speed up the process of getting drugs in the pipeline. Let's target them. Right, so this is also about strategy and thinking through, where do we want to put the pressure? Who's really making these decisions? And what's fascinating about the FDA, you can see the FDA has blood on their hands, right? People are RIP, killed by the FDA, silence equals death, guilty, like all the stuff in the background. But what's fascinating and hilarious is, if you like listen to oral histories about this, the FDA, they're just bureaucrats and scientists, and they were like, what is going on? Like, why are there suddenly people doing die-ins in front? Like, the FDA is like in Bethesda or something, isn't it? Like, it's, where is it? Rockville, Maryland. Sorry, Bethesda. Right, so there's like suburban DC. These people were not expecting this protest. And even though they are the ones who could really help, right? I mean, sure, the president could help too, but whoever waits for that. All right, okay. So, lesson 9. If it's relevant, use any public occasion to spread your message, even if doing so is shocking, or, as we've already discussed, perhaps because it's shocking, right? So one of the most powerful things that ACT UP did was that it used death rituals as political acts, right? So name some death rituals. What are death rituals that we have in the United States? Funerals, excellent. Memorials, what else? viewings, flowers, absolutely. Candles, absolutely, yes, yes, absolutely. Also obituaries, right? All of these things are rituals around death, right? Well, AIDS is about death, especially if you don't do anything, right? Which is what you've been not doing for a long time. Warning, my time warning. No? Oh, slide warning. Okay, right, so here we have, if I die of AIDS, forget burial, just drop my body on the steps of the FDA. Okay, the next slide actually is a political funeral for Steve Michaels, so you will see Steve Michaels' body. What is fascinating is you also see the White House in the background, right? So many people with, some people with AIDS were like, I want to make my funeral public. By the way, death rituals are fascinating. They are public. Right? An obituary is published in the newspaper, and an obituary is often what invites you to further death rituals, to a funeral, to a memorial, right? So it's interesting because they are quasi-public, quasi-private. There are a lot of rules around what you're allowed to do at a funeral that make it feel like it's private. But if you publish that the funeral is happening in the newspaper, that's not private. Right, so this is a political funeral in DC where they literally brought his body to the White House because that's what he wanted, right? He wanted the president and everybody around in DC to see the cost of AIDS. That was the funeral that he wanted. And locally, we also see folks in Utah responding to ACT UP as part of death rituals, particularly responding to silence equals death, right? So Steve was preceded in death. This is the kinship sentence, right? So he's making the who are the family, right? Steve was preceded in death by his older brother, blah, 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 and also many friends to AIDS, the disease that took him. And then we have, so being out about having AIDS in your obituary. Also, we wish to express our appreciation to Dr. Kristen Reese and Maggie Steiner and their staff. Also, Steve's nurses and aide, Kim, Barbara Wade, and their tender care, right? So, yes, we have AIDS in Utah. You can read about it in the Salt Lake Tribune. I am telling you that this is a huge epidemic that's costing all of these lives, and also these are the people who are responding. Why aren't you responding? Very similar, although less is hilarious, right? My picture on this page means that I have finally died. It's a great opening. Great opening to an obituary. Obituaries are fun. You should read obituaries. I like me some obituaries. Again, same move, and this is again the kinship section. So I'm preceded in death by all of these people, right? And the 70,000 people in this nation who have died of AIDS, many of them brave and resilient souls who have fought against impossible medical and numbing social odds. In a strange way, I am proud to be numbered among such incredible people. So what he and Scott Markland are doing is they're actually expanding the kinship sentence of the obituary to include all of the people with AIDS who have died, right? They are expanding the notion of family beyond biological family and to this broader affinity of sexuality, of disease, of stigma. And also shout out to Reese and Maggie again. My gratitude goes to Dr. Kristen Reese and Maggie Snyder, PA. They are smart, competent, and caring. If you have to do the AIDS thing, please don't. Really, just don't. Let's not do that, right? But if you have to do the AIDS thing, you want to do it with these two. If I could afford it, I would name you all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you see this happening in Utah as well and in our epidemic. All right, so further reading. Let the record show, Sarah Schulman, huge ACT UP activist. This is a how-to guide. After the silence, so this is Avram Finkelstein, who's important, he's part of Grand Fury. If you like the sort of discussion of the graphics and what goes into them, that's a great book for you. It was vulgar, it was beautiful. Similarly, this is also, I haven't read this one, this is also very much about the graphics and Grand Fury. So for future advice about how to be an activist, right, read these different things. Schulman is much more about the actions. These two are much more about the graphics. Locally, we have a documentary about Dr. Reese and Maggie Snyder. The University of Utah owns this, so you can stream it for free. It is also, if you have a University of Utah access to the library. We also, if you're looking for a research project, the Kristen Reese and Maggie Snyder HIV/AIDS Archive is here at the Marriott Library. We have about 45 oral histories, as well as various archival papers that you can use in a paper yourself. ACT UP is watching, right? So to conclude, ACT UP was a small but angry and determined group of people who changed the world. You should learn their lessons, and you can change the world too. This public lecture is a reminder that we as a community have faced prejudice and discrimination and backlash in the past. It is important to embrace that painful past and learn from it, while acknowledging that many things have changed between ACT UP's time and our own. We must take what is useful from their analysis and their tactics and apply them to the problems of the present. We must stand in solidarity with each other. We must love fiercely in a time of hate and division. And we must be the change we want to see in the world. Thank you. And then we'll do the, all right, hold on.
All right, thank you so much, Beth.
That was a ton of fun.
That was incredible. And to the whole team who helped put this together in a very short period of time. We started thinking about something much smaller in February, like Beth said, but really this happened in about 2.5 weeks. So, so what that tells me is we have more energy. And I am just really thankful to have had the people in my life to work with on this that helped me figure out what to do with my righteous fury. I was getting a little bit lost and I needed to find some joy, and this is what I poured it into. So thank you to all of you who helped with that. Thank you to everyone who showed up. Let's keep getting to work. I don't know how many of you saw it because some things just weren't as organized, like the entrance table. We do have raffle tickets there, and if you saw them and put your name and your phone number on one, that is wonderful. If you did not, please do so. I always get sad when I go to things and people in my life win a shirt and the shirt is not the right shirt for their body. So instead of having shirts available, if you win the raffle, we will ask you what style and size of shirt you would like, and we will get it from ACT UP New York and continue to support their work and get it to you. So you'll have to be a little bit patient, but it will actually be the right shirt for your body, which I think, duh. So because I think a lot of you maybe didn't see that, we're not going to pull names tonight. We will do, so it's very important that you put your name and we can read, especially your phone number. We can make up your name, but if you give us a number we can't read, that's going to be a problem. So please do that on your way out. Get some buttons. Otherwise, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.